Ladies and gentlemen, as Chairman of the Council, I'd like to welcome all of you present here in London and via the global webcast to groups in Hong Kong and New York and elsewhere to King's College here at the Strand in London. Today is a historic occasion for King's as we launch our largest ever fundraising campaign. And I'm so pleased that so many of our staff, students, alumni, and supporters are with us. This campaign aims to raise £500 million by 2015 to fund research and a number of other things, including the refurbishment of the East Wing of Somerset House. This research will work on some of the world's most pressing questions in the areas of neuroscience, mental health, cancer, and leadership and society. In the next hour, we will give you a sense of just how far we have made progress in these areas, but they remain the greatest challenges for our generation. We are particularly honoured and proud that the former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, has agreed to chair the appeal. He came to King's College 2 weeks ago, and I was able to tell him how much all of us at King's appreciate his involvement. We are also so pleased to be supported by many of our alumni, including Archbishop Tutu, despite his recent announcement that he is retiring from public affairs. So it's now my pleasure to ask David Dimbleby to chair the event and to coordinate the presentations in London and from Hong Kong and New York. The Dimbleby's Family Charitable Trust has been a generous and continuous supporter of King's College for many years. We are honoured that David is with us here today, and I now invite him to take over the presentation.
Lord Duro, thank you very much for those kind words of introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here today and to add my welcome to those of you here in the Great Hall, in the lecture theatre next door, and of course in New York and Hong Kong. We saw a vivid demonstration there of the many pressing questions the world faces. And anybody could write those questions down. Some of them are so blindingly obvious: the problems of poverty, of disease, of an aging population, the problems of war and terrorism, and indeed a growing belief that our planet itself is at risk. Universities like King's, apart from educating generation after generation of young students, of course, like the alumni who are with us today, have a vital role to play in focusing on some of those issues and in searching for solutions to them. And this campaign, as Lord Duro said, is to raise £500 million to make that work possible. Just a brief idea of what we're going to be doing this morning. We'll first be hearing from Sir Robert Worcester, who is one of the world's top, indeed one might say the world's top, he'd like that, opinion pollster, about what different parts of the world see as the most urgent challenges their countries and their societies face. Then friends and members of King's College are going to talk about King's role in meeting some of those challenges. And then 3 of King's leading academics are going to answer questions here on stage. So let's get off to a good start with the founder of Mori, and incidentally an honorary fellow of King's, Sir Robert Worcester.
Thank you, David.
All yours.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Lord Duro. And thank you for the opportunity of sharing with you some of the findings from the survey that we conducted in September. We covered 8 countries across 6 continents, a spread across the world in developing countries and developed countries, in all parts and continents that we could find. The United States, Brazil, Latin America, Great Britain, and South Africa, Saudi Arabia, India, China, and not to forget the Australians. We asked them a number of questions, and we were talking to a properly representative sample of those aged 16 to 64 at the second and third week of September. The data were weighted to the known population profile, so we have confidence that selecting a panel from the 3.8 million people that we have on the panel of a thing called Global Advisor, that we could properly represent these countries. We ask an interesting question. As question 1, what are the following, if any, do you think are the 2 or 3 greatest challenges that face the world? And we found in the United States it was war and terrorism at 62%. Great Britain, virtually the same, 60%. In Saudi Arabia, war and terrorism was number 1 on the issue. Now, if there's a leadership and society question that involves war and terrorism, we do know with considerable confidence how very well-equipped and effective the people who study that here at King's are. In India, war and terrorism. In Australia, war and terrorism. But interestingly, if you go below the equator, what you see in Brazil is global warming at 56%. In South Africa, global warming, virtually the same, 54%. And in China, topping the poll at 67%. In India, war and terrorism as well, Australia. If you look below the top issue to look at the 2 or 3 most important issues, then the economy stupid, as they say in the United States, and followed by poverty are the key things. Overpopulation joined poverty and economy that were tied. In Saudi Arabia, global warming and poverty. So it's very consistent here with the occasional change with population and overpopulation and pollution joining in China and Australia and Brazil and finally South Africa, with poverty and AIDS joining the consistent pattern we find across these very different countries. China, population, overpopulation. So we broke this down, but before I go to the breakdown, if you average across the world, and this is not a worldwide poll, but it is a reasonably representative group of 8 countries, we found that global warming and war and terrorism, when you average them across, one country, one vote, so to speak, or the people in one country, and global warming and war and terrorism tied at 46%. In third place, poverty, economy in fourth. So these are the issues that clearly will reflect the need as perceived across the world in these areas of importance to the people who will be affected by them. Of the 14, it went on to overpopulation, sanitation, AIDS, cancer, etc. But when you look at these things by country, it really gets interesting. And so we've given you a huge amount of data on the handouts that you'll receive. And if you look at China, up there at 67%, topping the poll by a long way, Brazil in next place, 56, who were describing global warming as one of the most greatest challenges that face the world. What you see is China on top, down in number 8, the USA, Britain also, less concerned, fewer people concerned with global warming. War and terrorism, on the other hand, and perfectly explicably, after 9/11, You find the USA at 62%, followed by Britain and its experience on 7-7 at 60%. China, on the other hand, has reversed places. So you can see from the color coding how very well distributed these issues are and how different they are when you get below the top two. But I won't dwell on that. I haven't the time for that, but you do have a copy of that in the pack that you have available to you. So what's the next thing? Which of the following do you think are the 2 or 3 greatest challenges that face your own country? And there we find the economy, stupid, again, the economy in Great Britain, the economy in Australia, poverty, however, in Brazil at 61%, Saudi Arabia poverty, poverty in India, poverty in South Africa, and pollution in China. So global warming seen to be the most important issue. Second, pollution in the country, China, facing their own nation. After that, war and terrorism again, poverty, even in the USA, Great Britain, the economy, overpopulation, war and terrorism, and poverty. In Australia, again, with mental health coming in 3rd place. Brazil, pollution in 3rd, lack of adequate shelter in 2nd, and poverty in 1st, as you know. South Africa, AIDS, and the economy. Saudi, war and terrorism, poverty, and the economy. And China, India, overpopulation, war and terrorism, and then finally China, overpopulation and aging, showing its ugly head there. And I say that from a personal position as well. So when we do the same thing and put them together, draw up an average, the economy and poverty are statistically speaking about the same, averaging across the 8 nations, followed by 4 really that are clustered together: overpopulation, global warming, war and terrorism, and pollution. And then you have education in the 3rd grouping, cancer and aging, and then the others down below. Now to pick those and pick, for instance, cancer, and you look at it by country, you see that in Australia, well, let's take Great Britain since I'm speaking from Great Britain, with apologies to Hong Kong and to New York. But if you take cancer specifically, 23% of the British public have said this is an important issue. Now that's over 10 million people if you're looking at a country with roughly 44 million adults. So it's 1 person in 4 who has picked one of the 2 or 3 most important issues in this country, the issue of cancer. If you contrast them, you can see there is quite a contrast between the world, 46% who picked global warming, and individually by country, 25%, just under half. War and terrorism, virtually the same. In fact, it is exactly 50% less, 46% against 23%. Poverty, equal. The economy, on the other hand, is more likely to be their own country. Pollution, overpopulation, sanitation, AIDS, and cancer, much the same. Access to basic education, and it's important to look at the precise wording of these questions, which again you'll find in your pack, and aging, with 14% saying in the country and 6% saying across the world. With that, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Bob. That was terrific. I was going to say it's easy to be overwhelmed by the scale and complexity of the problems we face. I now feel overwhelmed by the scale and complexity of Bob's charts. But they don't intimidate King's, of course. King's is determined that this university will make a difference, and that is just a template of some of the problems from which they are going to choose the subjects that they want to focus on, which I'll be talking about in a bit. But just before I do that, let's hear from some alumni of King's, some researchers, and some students with their take on King's College and its work.
The campaign is a £500 million campaign The three strands are cancer, which is really looking at our cancer research work and improving some of the clinical care around cancer. Leadership and society, which is looking at how we develop the next generation of leaders globally and help in terms of resolving some of the conflict situations internationally, and neurodegeneration and neurodegenerative diseases, which are looking at diseases like Alzheimer's and stroke that are such a huge issue for society at the moment.
King's is well placed, both in terms of its location and in terms of its reputation, to attract quality people to its research laboratories and departments. I think the money that we are trying to raise for King's is well directed. We are a force in these areas.
The three areas which the campaign concentrates on, i.e. cancer research, neuroscience and international leadership, are at the heart of many of the issues which the world faces today. People care about cancer and people want to find a cure for cancer. That's been around for a long time. But before we get to that stage, there's so many questions that need to be answered along the way.
My area of interest, for example, was looking at the way different proteins communicate with each other, interact with each other. And there are very few places in the world that were able to offer me the techniques that I needed. I think King's College London was only one of about 3 or 4 places worldwide that were able to do that. So with the sort of funding that will be available through the campaign, it will definitely encourage more clinicians like myself to come out of the clinical arena and embrace the basic science that is available.
It's very important that we do research into neuroscience and how that relates to people with mental illness. Until you begin to understand what happens in the mind of somebody like myself, which part of my mind produces the auditory hallucinations, what happens at the molecular or biochemical level, until you really understand what goes on in the mind, you can't begin to develop more targeted medications. What I want is a medication which stops the symptoms I experienced.
King's College was actually my first choice in my UCAS statement. I'm in my second year of medicine and I plan on doing a BSc, so that adds an additional year. So I'm looking to graduate hopefully within the next 5 years. I was aware that King's College always had a leading role in neuroscience, but I was also delighted to find out that it's also involved in international leadership as well as cancer research. And I think this campaign to raise £500 million for this cause is a milestone in improving quality of life.
We live in a diverse, growing, internationalised world. We live in a globalised world, and that excites me. But of course, it brings along its challenges. What we really need to do is look at how we can solve the problem from the inside.
It might be about a new way of supporting young women in Africa to become the generations of leaders in some very difficult situations. There are a number of areas where we can have impacts within a very short 5 or 10 year time frame.
One of the most distinctive features of Santander is our long-term commitment with universities. The universities that are part of this network stand out for the quality of their education and their research, but also for their international orientation. King's College London is one of the top universities in the world, so for us, it was only natural to support its excellent work by signing a partnership agreement.
I think one of the things we're trying to do with this campaign is really change the way that the public perceive giving to universities. So I think historically it's very much been about give to your alma mater, you benefited from your degree, therefore you should give back so that the next generation can benefit in the way that you did. And that is important, and it's really important to King's, but what universities do is so much more than that.
I think what that last speaker said was particularly interesting and pertinent, because it's important about this campaign. Unlike so many of the campaigns to raise funds for universities or colleges, is that it is targeted at specific aims, areas where King's believes its own talents, its own excellence will yield results. Neuroscience and mental health, the whole concept of leadership and society, and cancer. Now, what we're going to do next is to hear from 3 top academics here and Bob Wooster, and I'd like you to welcome them, and then I'll explain who they are and why they're here. So we're going to have a panel discussion here with questions which will be up on the screen in just a moment. But let me say, first of all, Professor Kshitish Kapoor is Dean of the Institute of Psychiatry at King's, Professor of Schizophrenia, Imaging and Therapeutics. Dr. Funmi Olonishakin is Director of Conflict Security and Development Group at King's and Director of the African Leadership Center in Nairobi. And Professor Peter Parker is Head of the Cancer Division and Deputy Director of the Integrated Cancer Center. And of course, Sir Robert Wooster, you've met already. Now, we've had various questions put in. You noticed how important war and terrorism were at the top of Bob Wooster's description of the polling of those countries. And our first question directs itself at that. So let's have that, please.
How can academia help provide practical solutions to terrorism?
How can academia help provide practical solutions? Funmi Olonishakin.
Thank you very much. I think academia has two main roles when it comes to how to provide practical solutions to the challenge posed by terrorism. The first is research, which is what we do well here at King's College London. Researching into the root causes of terrorism, for example, helps to counter the narratives that sustain terrorism in society and can help to challenge the common stereotypes and assumptions about terrorism. For example, our research tells us, and it helps us inform society, that terrorism is an age-old problem. It's not just a challenge for the 21st century. Secondly, terrorism cuts across different regions in different ways. It mutates over time, and it changes its form and patterns depending on the kind of challenges that a particular country or region faces. Thirdly, for example, is that radicalization does not always, a radicalized person or a radicalized group does not necessarily become a terrorist in that sense. And I think being able to challenge these common assumptions and being able to provide society with a good understanding of the factors at the root of terrorism can begin to help us shape the ideas that govern society at large, but the ideas and the decisions that decision makers make. And that takes me to the second role that academia plays. That second role, and that is something we do very well at King's, is that as a matter of practice, we interact with society at large, the body of practitioners, the body of policymakers, and regional and international actors, the United Nations, African Union, European Union, the Economic Community of West African States. We interact in a very robust way to help them begin to rethink their ideas. One challenge that practitioners in bureaucracies have, for example, is that of institutional memory. People move from place to place, and people forget that this sort of challenge existed in the past, and there was a way society responded to it. We do that very well at King's, and I'll leave it at that for now.
Just before you end, how would you use new funding from this 500 million? What would you actually do with your department? How would it help improve the work you're doing?
I think one of the things that we can do with new funding is to connect several strands. When you look at actors in society, new research that will look at the nature of the crisis that we face, for example, in terrorism, and help us look at these challenges in a way that we're not taking utilitarian approaches or simplistic approaches to the problem, which is what tends to happen with governments. But at the same time, we will be able to build a whole community of people, researchers, end users, if you like, practitioners and policymakers, who will, as a matter, our research is process-oriented most of the time in any case. So we work together over a period of time, find the results, feed them back into society, and begin to change attitudes in a way that we understand that societies cannot afford to create a community of people with nothing to lose across the world.
Funmi, thanks very much. Let's stick with your three specialisms to start with and take this question on cancer.
Knowing that cancer kills over 7 million people worldwide every year, why should the world care about cancer?
Peter Parker.
Thank you. 7 million is a huge human toll. In fact, if we don't improve treatments, it's going to be more than 10 million by 2020. So this is a really substantial impact on society. Cancer has overtaken heart disease in terms of heart attacks, in terms of death, the causation of death. So this is something that really has a very substantial impact. I think there probably is nobody in this room that isn't touched by cancer in some way, directly, through friends, family, colleagues. 1 in 3 individuals in this country will be diagnosed with cancer, and that is a huge impact then on us and our society, and that is true worldwide. That, at one level, I think from a purely stark economic view, the cost of cancer to society is huge. Something of the order of probably £550 billion per year in a report that came out in about 2008. But at a personal level, I think it really motivates all of us. It motivates us in terms of caring. It motivates us in terms of wanting to drive improvements in therapeutics. And it motivates us, I hope, in terms of our friends and supporters in helping us do and drive the agenda of cancer and improving cancer treatments that we will push out through our research. And that is very much centered around the personalized medicine agenda, so individualizing treatments for individuals. So improving what we understand about the nature of somebody's disease, about how they will respond to particular drugs, and matching those in a way that then improves outcomes, improves the quality of life for those patients. And this is really, as a general theme, at the top of our agenda.
You, like everybody else, rely a lot on immigration to fuel your researchers. And today's story that cancer in particular, cancer research departments are worried that they're not going to be able to get the talent into Britain. Would you like to comment on that? Because it's all very well having the money. If you don't have the people, you can't do anything, can you?
That's certainly the case. I think it's probably true for all of us in terms of the research that we do, that we take on. We both benefit from a worldwide community in terms of the researchers who come and work with us. We train, of course, as well, so it is a mutual relationship. But the cap that exists in terms of the government imposing a limitation on non-EU workers coming to work is theoretically a problem for us. In practice, it may be a real problem for us in getting the best of the people that we would like to attract worldwide to come and help us. And it is a worldwide activity. Getting different perspectives on the sorts of activities that we all drive is very important in the multidisciplinary world in which we need to work. And it really is multidisciplinary, and it helps then to have that broad perspective in terms of where people come from, where they have been trained, and to bring that to benefit what we are trying to do. So the cap is going to be a problem if it does indeed reduce our ability to attract people from outside the European community.
One other thing, there is a lot of cancer research done in every country in the world, particularly in the United States, for instance. What would you identify as King's special contribution?
I think something that we do that is really very distinctive is the multidisciplinarity of what we are, of how the Integrated Cancer Centre of King's Health Partners has been created. So let me give you an example. I talked about a personalized medicine agenda, and really this is about understanding someone's tumor and being able to predict how well they will fare with given treatments. So one of our teams, led by Professor Tony Ng, has identified a series of molecular markers, a signature that determines whether breast cancers will spread. And this we are looking at to see whether this is going to be useful in terms of driving clinical decision-making. But the team involved in making that happen has involved bioinformaticians, mathematicians, biophysicists, biostatisticians. I can't get the words out. There are very many different flavors of expertise that are really required to make this happen. And that integrated skill set is really what we have in the Integrated Cancer Centre at KHP, and it's something that's very distinctive.
Good, thanks very much. Let's turn to a subject which, according to Robert Worcester's research, was particularly felt in China and Australia and in Great Britain, which was the problems posed by aging. And we've got this question, which I'd like to put to you, Kshitij.
What more could we be doing to work together to help eradicate the problems associated with an ageing population?
Perhaps you could define the problems and also tell us a bit about what King's is doing about them.
Well, aging is an age-old problem. We're not out to eradicate that. What we do want to actually do is see how we can deal with it better. And I think what we've done over the last century is learned how to deal with the aging body better. We used to live an average of 55. Fortunately, on average, most of us will now live beyond 80. What we've not prepared for is what to do with the aging brain and the aging mind. So for the next century, the challenge for us as a race is to figure out what to do with the aging mind and the aging body. Now, here is a number we won't like, but 1 in 4 out of us will develop dementia. That's just one example. Now you're all looking at where are the other 3 people. Well, it's going to be 1 in 4 of us. And even if it's 1 or 4 of us, it means each of us will be touched, either caring or living with someone who has this illness. 10 years ago, we knew very little about dementia. In the last 10 years, something categorically has changed. So today we know about the genes that lead you to a risk of dementia. So I could easily see through the work that we've done and also some other people, in the next 5 or 10 years, we could have tests that would help identify those who are at high risk. Now, it's no good telling people they're at high risk if you can't then help them do something about it. So we've been focusing on brain imaging to see that if we combine brain imaging with paper and pencil tests, can you monitor the onset of dementia before it becomes really evident clinically? And now we can do that. So we can actually track people longitudinally. So we can look at a high-risk population because they're genetics. We can follow them up and see that they're coming up to dementia. Which brings us to the last challenge, that once you've identified these people, what are you going to do for them? And that is where we won't do it alone because King's College is not a drug company. But we are working with pharmaceutical industries in partnership to bring to that our skills, to bring to that our partnerships with our NHS colleagues in the SLAM NHS Foundation Trust, in the KCH Trust, and through King's Health Partners, so we can offer the solution of taking these findings from the bench to the bedside. So that, I think, is what we can do to help with the sort of aging mind and the aging brain.
And the question that I put to the others, this huge sum of money King's is aiming to raise, or it sounds huge. Once everybody's heard this, of course, it'll seem to diminish very fast, I hope. But how would you particularly earmark the funds that came your way?
Well, a substantial portion of it has been earmarked for neurosciences and mental health, for which we're very thankful. So the question is, how do we plan to use it further? I think what we bring uniquely to this question is our ability to take things from the bench to the bedside. So I think what does truly characterize the work at King's College London is that we work not only multidisciplinary within sciences, but in partnership with our colleagues in the NHS. So to this worldwide problem, what we uniquely want to present are solutions at the translational interface where they actually help patients, be those tests or be those treatments.
You raised something, it's interesting, which Peter also said, which is that, and you make both of you say King's does this almost as though it were not done elsewhere, of bench to bedside, of theoretical to practical, as part of the whole ethos of King's. And I wonder if all 3 of you would agree that particularly on the terrorism thing, that you talked about, talking to the United Nations, talking to governmental bodies. Do you see the theory that goes on in your departments as it being part of your job to try and apply that and teach people how to use it?
Absolutely. I think we cannot underscore that enough. That, I think, is the bread and butter of the research we do at King's. We think of society at large and the nature of the problem that confronts society, whether we're talking about medical science or we're looking at social sciences. And we already involve society, members of society at large, be they ordinary citizens that have experienced that problem, and I can apply that to a whole range of things, not just terrorism, but armed conflict in other regions, policymakers, those who are responding real time to those challenges, and we involve them in the research from the start. And from our experience, this has resulted in at least 50% of the times, because of course you try and test, there's a lot of trial and error, but in at least 50% of the time, we have seen a direct change in policy as a result of the research we've undertaken here. ECOWAS is a good example. The United Nations, parts of the United Nations will be another example. I think that is what differentiates us as an institution from the rest of our counterparts. We take that very seriously here. It's not just about theory, it's about making that theory relevant to society at large.
Before we go on to another question, Sir Robert, you're an honorary fellow of King's, so you're of course parti pris in all this. But how do these comments we've heard reflect on the research you did in meeting some of the challenges?
I was hoping you would ask me that, because my answer to the last gentleman's question is I forgot the answer. I've looked carefully, because I've been on the inside of this now for several months, at the various areas of expertise here at King's, and it's really overwhelming. And also the diversity of the minds that are putting their thoughts to these problems. And so each of the problems is identified in various countries as of greater or lesser importance, and it depends on the demographics of the country, the state of poverty or development of the countries, and to see the breadth of the ability of the people at King's to answer the questions that are posed by the populations of these countries is impressive indeed.
Okay. And do you, the other three of you, do you do this kind of survey of what patients want or what governments want before you embark on research or before you look for money? Or do you actually have it all in your heads and try and persuade people with checkbooks to follow you?
No, it's certainly done with consultation, particularly with patients. So that's a key part of what we do. That's actually what we deliver. That's the outcome in terms of the benefit, at least from the cancer perspective, in terms of improving patient care. So certainly what we do is consult with patients. We have patients who sit on various parts of our executive for the Integrated Cancer Center at King's Health Partners, and we take advice and steers from them and their voice people who really have an impact on what we do and the direction of travel.
Were any of you surprised by what Sir Robert revealed in the poll? Or did it seem different from what you'd expected?
What struck me was the uniformity of opinion across the world. I was struck that 40% of people in the US are worried about poverty, but only 40% of the people in India are worried about poverty. So I thought this was surprising to me. But what was striking to me is the uniformity of opinion. Maybe this is a globalized world, and that's one of the manifestations of it.
Okay. Yes, Bob.
The thing that most surprised me was that China came up with the answers that they did of global warming and of pollution, and it seemed to me, and aging, and it seemed to me that I'm thinking in the past about China, not about China of today and the future. And that was the one thing that really stood out to me, because it was so astonishing to see the concern about the world that China has.
Not least because so many governments heap opprobrium on China for precisely these things of pollution and the rest, and for not dealing with it.
Well, it's captured their minds.
Democracy at work through ipsos mori, that's what it is. Let's have a question from Lord Burns, the chairman of Santander.
The economics profession has come under quite a lot of criticism during the recession for failing to warn about impending problems and its inability to agree on possible solutions to the crisis. One result of the continuing recession has been the impact on government borrowing and government debt in the UK. This leads me to the important question of how is the economic crisis impacting your area of research?
So that's the question. How is the economic crisis impacting your area of research. Kshitij, would you like to start on that, and I'll go down the line?
Well, let me start actually on a positive note. I must say that, the political dialogue going on at the moment needs to be congratulated that even in these tough times, the government has at least decided to flatline science spending rather than reduce it. So I take that to be a positive. What also has to be recognized is that a lot of energy was put into basic discovery over the last few years, and it has delivered what it was anticipated it would deliver. So I was talking about the genetics and imaging findings. They've gotten us to the door. The challenge is to translate these into real things that will affect patients. We will need a step up of investment. So if there is something that I'm worried about, is whether the governments can be looked to for that. And I'm, of course, very much hoping is that this campaign will be part of the answer to help us that step up, which the government may not be in a position to do.
Funmi.
In my own field, peace and security, there's a noticeable shift. We have seen a tendency or a great temptation for supporters of the research that we undertake to lean towards, if you like, open conflict. We work in the areas of peace building, conflict prevention, the prevention of terrorism. And in the last 2 years, you have seen a tendency for donors, for example, to lean towards just dealing with the real crisis on the ground. Iraq, Afghanistan, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Sudan, and so on, and move away from conflict prevention. I think there's a real danger in this, in the sense that if you look at what the world spends on a peacekeeping operation, for example, averagely, depending on the size of that operation, the world spends about $500 million to about $1 billion annually. And yet, it costs less than 10% of that to prevent that conflict in the first instance. I think this is a real impact. This is a real danger involved in moving towards open conflict and ignoring the prevention of conflict.
Okay. Peter?
I mean, clearly there will be an impact. We've just discussed the capping in terms of non-EU students and trainees and so on. But clearly, I mean, what we're seeing is a shift in a sense in the business model of universities, and I guess that's being imposed by government. And we will still be there training the best for tomorrow, training minds, and really extracting the best from the best individuals. But I think what we are doing, and I'd echo what Kshitij has said, we are here in terms of this campaign launch, really to look to supporters to help us excel in areas where we have strategic priorities. And this is really quite distinct, and I hope that our supporters who are here today will see that we have the underlying capacity, and that what we're really doing then is driving that level of excellence.
Okay. We've just got enough time, I think, to get in one more question, and then I'd just like you all to sum up this campaign as you see it. But let's have this question first of all.
How can we help developing countries begin to develop the infrastructure they desperately need?
This is from A. Blue, who's an alumnus of King's, who's hosting the gathering in Hong Kong today. So how can we, King's, help developing countries begin to create the infrastructure they desperately need? Funmi, do you want to go on that?
Yes, let me share my thoughts on that. I think when you look at the developing regions of the world, they have one thing in common in this 21st century. There's enormous talent, intellectual capital in those regions. But there's a tendency to see that just flit away to other parts of the world where there seems to be greater prosperity. We call it commonly the brain drain. I think that I see as the biggest challenge. The second issue is the fact that within those countries themselves, talent within those countries, talented people within those countries are isolated and they're scattered, and this is where the real issue of bad governance. Of course, it's not the preserve of any one region, but some regions have this challenge more than others. That is when that becomes actually the bane of all of what we're talking about. Being able to connect the talent that lies within these countries and regions with modern communications that allows them, that gives them a fighting chance to put their minds together and to help create new ideas and innovations that can change the destiny for the better of those regions is what I think we need to focus on.
Kshitij, does your work have a way of dealing with this question? Is part of what you do meant to answer this question?
We're certainly contributing to that. So the first encouraging thing is that the developing world doesn't need to build the same infrastructure in the same sequential order as we did it over 200 years. So, if you look at sort of telephony, it never made it to India when there were wires in telephones. They just went to the cellular telephones and jumped that. So the infrastructure development would be different. Now, where does a university come in? I think we can help them with their intellectual infrastructure. And indeed, we are doing that. So through KCL, we have a number of partnerships whereby we are actually working with groups around the world, in Brazil, in China, India, other countries, to help them develop the intellectual infrastructure. And the other big thing we do is we train minds. People come to King's College London. We have a huge number of international students, and they then leave and go back and fertilize their own areas. So that's how I think we can help with the development of infrastructure.
You want to add to that, Peter?
Yeah, well, I think just two things very briefly. I think the first would relate to, probably we're all very familiar with the antiretrovirals in terms of the treatment of HIV/AIDS and the way in which that's been developed in high-income countries, but nevertheless is available to lower and middle-income countries and is done so through a pricing mechanism. That doesn't mean that one needs to have done all of that research and done all of that development within those countries. And clearly, in terms, I think, of cancer and other diseases where there are portable solutions, we ought to be looking at that as a paradigm for the future. But then secondly, I think in relation to how we work and what we do, we interact with the global community. And that's not just working with North America, because they're well resourced. We work with South America. We work with India. We have projects also in Asia. And that is both policy as well as training and fellowship exchange and research activities. So there is an ongoing exchange that's important to what we do.
Okay. I'm going to put one question of my own before we end this discussion, and a brief answer, if you would. But there are a lot of people asking for money. King's is asking for 500 million today. Why King's? Bob Worcester.
Because working as I do, and I want to blend in the last question with that, because I've been working for the government of Trinidad and Tobago for the last 7 or 8 years. And the former prime minister put as his number one objective for the period that he was prime minister to move them toward a fully developed country in 2020. Now, they have 2 good universities there, the University of the West Indies in their Port of Spain branch and the University of Trinidad and Tobago. But they can't do it alone. King's can help them do it in a way that it's impossible for a country, even with the wealth, and it does have comparative wealth to other Caribbean countries, even with the wealth they have. They just can't do it themselves. They need help, and help is here at King's.
Okay. Peter, why King's?
King's, because I think we have the right philosophy. We have very much a integrated activity in terms of the skills we bring to these problems, and we are absolutely focused on the people who are going to get the benefits, and that's the patients that we serve.
Okay. Funmi?
I say King's, and I can say that, I can state that categorically from 25 years of being at King's College London as a student and staff member, that this college is exceptional in terms of developing innovative minds. It creates a space for people to try new things and to research to their fullest capacity. This is why King's is is about the only institution in the United Kingdom at the moment, which is not thinking of setting up its own King's College in Africa, but is actually extending the capacity and the facility for Africa to have its own center with the capacity that King's can throw behind it in terms of technology and human capacity as well. Yeah. I think King's is the place where much of these things can take place. Thanks.
Now, Funmi speaks as someone who's been in King's. Actually, I came to King's from North America. And the reason I did that is because in the area of neurosciences and mental health, I would submit that King's is very good and is undoubtedly the European leader in doing that. Why you should support us is because we will do it in partnership. It won't be just King's College London. It will be along with our NHS partners in the context of King's Health partners, and I think we can succeed. And the last point is, because I think we have the human intellectual talent to do it. Machines are important, buildings are needed, but finally it's people, and I think we have the scientists who can do it.
Good. Well, thank you very much. That's some of King's answers to world questions. Would you thank our panelists here? Thank you very much. Well, as Lord Douro said at the beginning, there's one former student who'd like to be here today and instead has sent this message of support because he couldn't come here. One of many alumni from King's who have influence and who spread the knowledge they acquired here across the world, the Most Reverend Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
It is a very great honor to be asked as a former King's College London student to speak to you. I am so very proud of this place and of the work it has done and will continue to do. I have great hope for the future. We can find peaceful solutions to ongoing confrontations. We can find a cure to the worst illnesses, and we can support the needs of an aging population. I'm confident that in my lifetime, I will see tremendous advances in the fight against cancer, the challenge to prevent Alzheimer's, and in the quest to build just, tolerant societies. Together, we can answer big questions. I have seen for myself how the African Leadership Center provides just one example of the way King's translates its world-class research into practical solutions that work on the ground. So, I am incredibly excited about the World Questions King's Answers campaign, and proud that as a university, we're stepping up to the plate, determined to confront the great challenges we face. I wish it every success.
Desmond Tutu there, of course. Well, finally, to tell us a little bit more about how King's hopes, in Tutu's words, to step up to the plate, the man who's been principal of the college and professor of social history for the past 6 years and is now its president, Rick Traynor.
Thanks very much, David. Thank you very much, David. And may I add my thanks to David's and those of the audience, to Sir Robert, Shittage, Funmi, and Peter for that thought-provoking discussion. And of course, I join in all our thanks to Archbishop Tutu. Now, I've been asked more than once, why now? Why launch a fundraising campaign for £500 million now? Well, hearing the weighty issues debated this afternoon, it's sobering to consider the scale of the challenges that the world faces. It's also humbling to witness the huge talent and energy of our colleagues who are willing to undertake this work. So I hope you'll agree with me that the reason we must launch World Questions, King's Answers now is simple. Our researchers and academics need help in order to make a major contribution to some of the big problems that people are concerned about around the world, such as child epilepsy, motor neuron disease, and climate change in the context of space policy. More clinical trials for cancer, a vaccine for leukemia. We launch this campaign now because we can and must make a real difference in these and other areas. This campaign unites the whole college in a belief that now is the time for universities like ours. This is a key time for our sector to make the case for what we can achieve, the great contribution we are making to society. And indeed, of course, the motto of King's College London is, in the service of society. King's transforms lives for the better through our educational opportunity, our discovery, and our positive contribution to resolving world issues. I'm proud that through World Questions, King's Answers, we're inviting even more collaboration, insisting that more research be done, providing even more opportunity for change that will have a positive impact on millions of people in the near term. And I draw great confidence about the success of this campaign, not least from the fact that we're among the many collaborating organizations that will be assisting us are the National Health Service trusts with which we're collaborating in King's Health Partners. And I mentioned that this campaign is uniting the whole college. We're going to do this in a variety of ways. As you've heard, we're going to concentrate on 3 main themes, but we're not going to turn any significant collaborators, interests, or donors away. This is a campaign focusing on a series of main problems, but addressing the whole spectrum of interests that the college is concerned with. We're proud that, as the chairman indicated in his remarks, Sir John Major has agreed to serve as chair of the World Questions King's Answers Campaign Board. Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1990 to 1997, he's now a much sought-after advisor and commentator on international affairs. He has strong personal links with King's local community. Sir John grew up in South London, and his daughter was born at King's College Hospital. And he takes a close interest in each of the 3 main campaign themes. Although he couldn't be with us today, Sir John was here on campus just 2 weeks ago to make the following comments to you on the occasion of this launch.
I'm delighted to chair this campaign. It reinforces King's College London as a pioneer in world-class research and best placed to respond to the enormous challenges of a world moving faster than is comfortable. This campaign's vital, not just for King's, but for many millions around the world. King's Health research will help those battling with cancer or caring for a loved one, perhaps with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. Their policy work, our campaign, will benefit those living in poverty or those suffering the effects of war. It will help create stable and prosperous societies around the world. Our modern world throws up problems of great complexity and questions that seem sometimes impossible to answer. The easy option is to leave the most challenging issues for others to address. Easy, but wrong. In their own areas of expertise, King's is determined to remain at the forefront of research that will not only benefit and enrich our own lives, but those of our children and our children's children. So I hope that you'll be as inspired as I am by the work of King's and join with me in supporting our World Questions King's Answers campaign. Thank you.
In his role as campaign board chair, Sir John will be supported by a number of inspiring and enthusiastic members, including King's alumnus and donor, Mr. Rory Tapner, a key member of our College Council who is with us in the audience today, and King's alumnus and donor, Sir Robin Auld, who will be hosting a reception to celebrate this launch in the balmy latitude of Bermuda this evening. From New York, Sir Derek Maughan, a dedicated alumnus and donor to King's College London for many years, will be joining the campaign board as well. And over the next 6 months, many more individuals will be joining this esteemed board to help in the work we're going to do in the campaign. Over the next 5 years, you'll hear much more about the progress we make and the knowledge we gain from work supported by this campaign. However, for today, let me end by thanking those who have made it possible to achieve what we have already. £197 million has already been raised, and more donations are coming in every day. To our staff, students, alumni, and supporters here in London, in New York, in Hong Kong, and around the world, thank you. It's your dedication and your belief in the power of education and research to transform lives, which enables us to address such a range of questions of this importance. We could not have considered the World Questions King's Answers campaign without the great support shown by this community, and we're truly grateful. I hope you've enjoyed this brief introduction to the campaign and its work, and I thank you again for coming to share in this historic event with us. I particularly would like to thank once again David Dimbleby and our panelists, Sir Robert, क्षितिज, Funmi, and Peter. Thank you all very much indeed.